The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I knew it was going to ruin my day before I even opened it. Nothing good ever came in a cream-colored envelope with the Ridgewater Estates Homeowners Association letterhead embossed in gold at the top left corner. I tore it open while standing at my kitchen counter, coffee growing cold in my hand, and read the words that made my blood pressure spike immediately. Zate. Dear Mr. Connor Hartley, effective immediately, all watercraft are banned from docking at Sunset Marina. This includes, but is not limited to, sailboats, motorboats, kayaks, canoes, and jet skis. All vessels must be removed within 14 days, or they will be considered abandoned property and disposed of accordingly. This decision was made in the best interest of community aesthetics and property values. Failure to comply will result in fines of $500 per day. Sincerely, Patricia Moreland, HOA President. I read it 3 times, each time feeling my anger build like a pressure cooker. Sunset Marina was my marina, not in some vague emotional sense, but legally and completely mine. I had purchased it 15 years ago when I first moved to Ridgewater Estates in Florida, on the Gulf Coast just north of Tampa. The marina had been part of a separate parcel that came with boat slips, a small office building, and waterfront access. Every single slip in that marina belonged to me. I leased them out to residents and outsiders alike, generating a decent supplementary income to my consulting business. How Patricia Moreland thought she had the authority to ban boats from my private property was beyond comprehension, but this was typical of her management style. In the 3 years since she had taken over as HOA president, she had turned our peaceful waterfront community into a bureaucratic nightmare. She had banned certain colors of mailboxes, mandated specific breeds of grass, and tried to enforce a rule about when residents could have their garage doors open. I grabbed my phone and called my attorney, Marcus Chen, who had handled the marina purchase years ago. He picked up on the second ring. Connor, what's going on? I need you to pull every document related to my marina purchase. The HOA just tried to ban boats from my property. There was a long pause. They did what? You heard me right. I have a letter here saying all boats must be removed from Sunset Marina within 2 weeks, or they'll be disposed of. Marcus let out a low whistle. That's impressively stupid, even for an HOA. Let me make some calls and review the paperwork. Can you scan that letter and send it to me? Already doing it, I said, walking to my home office. Within minutes, the letter was on its way to Marcus, and I was pulling out my own copies of the marina deed and title documents. Everything was crystal clear. The marina was purchased as a separate transaction from my house, though both properties were technically within the geographic boundaries of Ridgewater Estates. The HOA covenants and restrictions that applied to residential properties explicitly did not apply to commercial waterfront properties, which had been grandfathered in when the development was built in 1985. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor, Dave Sutton, who kept his fishing boat in Slip 17. Did you see this insanity? Patricia is trying to shut down the marina, I called him immediately. I saw it. I'm handling it. How can she even do this? That marina has been there longer than half the houses in this development. She can't do it, Dave. The marina is my private property. She has zero authority over it. Thank God. Jenny and I were already trying to figure out where we'd dock the boat. Every other marina within 20 miles is full or crazy expensive. That was the real issue here. Sunset Marina was affordable and convenient. 22 slips, all occupied by people who loved being on the water. Some were Ridgewater residents, others came from surrounding communities. I charged fair rates, kept the docks maintained, and provided a secure, gated environment. Patricia's decision would affect dozens of families and their livelihoods, especially the handful of people who use their boats for commercial fishing operations. The next morning, I decided to attend the HOA board meeting scheduled for that evening. These meetings were typically held in the community clubhouse, a spacious building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the waterfront. I arrived early and took a seat in the back row, watching as other residents filed in. The tension in the room was palpable. At least a dozen people who kept boats at my marina were in attendance, their faces tight with worry and anger. Patricia swept in at exactly 7 o'clock, flanked by the other board members. Todd Kemper, the vice president who seemed to exist solely to nod at everything Patricia said, and Helen Fitzgerald, the treasurer who at least occasionally pushed back on Patricia's more egregious ideas. Patricia was exactly what you'd expect. Mid-50s, severely styled blonde hair that looked like it had been sprayed into place with industrial strength product, and a burgundy pantsuit that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," from across the room. She called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel and launched into the agenda without preamble. Finances, landscaping contracts, a debate about whether the community pool should be open until 9 or 10 during summer months. Standard stuff. Then she got to new business. As you all are aware, the board has made the difficult decision to ban all watercraft from Sunset Marina, effective immediately. The room erupted. At least 10 people started talking at once, voices rising in protest. Patricia banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order! We will have order! This decision was made after careful consideration of community standards and property values. The marina has become an eyesore, and we have received multiple complaints about noise, pollution, and unsavory individuals using the facilities." I stood up, keeping my voice level. "Patricia, on what authority are you making this decision?" She looked at me with barely concealed disdain. "The authority vested in this board by the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of Ridgewater Estates, Mr. Hartley." "And did you review those CCRs before issuing your ban?" "Of course we did. The board takes its responsibilities seriously." "Then you're aware that Sunset Marina is private property, commercially zoned, and explicitly excluded from HOA jurisdiction under Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the original development agreement?" The color drained from Patricia's face, but she recovered quickly. "That's a misinterpretation. All properties within the geographic boundaries of Ridgewater Estates fall under HOA governance." I pulled out a folder I had prepared. "I have the title documents, the zoning records, and the original development agreement right here. I also have a letter from my attorney confirming that the marina is entirely outside your authority. Would you like to review them?" Todd leaned over and whispered something to Patricia. She waved him off impatiently. "Mr. Hartley, this board will not be bullied by threats of legal action. Our decision stands." "It's not a threat, Patricia. It's a statement of fact. You're attempting to exercise control over property you have no legal claim to. If you proceed with this ban, you'll be interfering with valid lease agreements I have with my tenants. That's actionable." Helen spoke up for the first time. "Patricia, maybe we should table this discussion and have our attorney review the documents." "There's nothing to review," Patricia snapped. "The decision has been made." I sat back down, letting the other residents take over. The meeting devolved into chaos for another 20 minutes before Patricia adjourned it abruptly and stormed out. Several people came up to me afterward, asking what would happen next. "Keep your boats where they are," I told them. "Nobody is removing anything. This ban has no legal standing." Over the next week, I watched with mounting frustration as Patricia doubled down. She sent additional letters to every slip holder threatening legal action. She posted signs at the marina entrance declaring it closed by order of the HOA. She even contacted the county zoning office trying to find some regulation she could use against me. Marcus called me on Friday afternoon with an update. I spoke with the county. Patricia filed a complaint claiming the marina was operating without proper permits. The zoning officer laughed when I showed him your paperwork. "You're completely compliant, and you've been paying your commercial property taxes without issue for 15 years. He noted her complaint as frivolous. What's her end game here? Control, probably, or she genuinely doesn't understand property law. Either way, you need to send her a cease and desist. Make it clear that any further interference will result in a lawsuit. Draft it up. Make it strong." The cease and desist was delivered by courier on Monday morning. I got a call from Patricia within the hour, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare you threaten this board with legal action?" "I'm not threatening anything, Patricia. I'm informing you of the consequences if you continue to interfere with my property rights. The marina is mine. You have no authority over it. End of discussion." "This community will not be held hostage by your selfish interests, Mr. Hartley. This has nothing to do with selfishness. I own the property. I'm operating it legally. You're the one trying to overstep your authority." She hung up on me. I expected that to be the end of it, but I had seriously underestimated Patricia's stubbornness and her willingness to escalate. 2 days later, I arrived at the marina to find a padlock on the main gate, not just any padlock, but a heavy-duty industrial chain with a lock the size of my fist. A new sign had been posted. This facility is closed by order of Ridgewater Estates HOA. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I called the sheriff's office immediately. A deputy arrived within 20 minutes, a young guy named Officer Reynolds, who looked at the situation with a mixture of confusion and amusement. So let me get this straight. This is your property and someone else locked you out? Correct. The HOA president is trying to shut down my marina without any legal authority. Do you have documentation proving ownership? I showed him the title, the deed, and the tax records I now carried with me everywhere. He nodded slowly. Yeah, this is pretty clear-cut. You want me to cut the lock? I want you to document this as vandalism and criminal trespass. I'll cut the lock myself, but I want this on record. Officer Reynolds took photos and wrote up a report. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I hesitated, then decided against it for now. Not yet, but if this continues, I will. I had bolt cutters in my truck. The lock was tough, but it eventually gave way with a loud snap. I removed the chain and the sign, throwing both in my truck bed as evidence. Then I called Marcus again. It's escalating. She locked me out of my own property. That's criminal trespass and possibly vandalism. You need to press charges. I documented it with the sheriff. If she does anything else, I'll move forward. Connor, you're being too patient. This woman is unhinged. You need to shut this down hard and fast. He was right, but part of me hoped Patricia would come to her senses. That was naive, as I discovered the following week when I received notice that the HOA was filing a lawsuit against me, seeking an injunction to close the marina permanently. The lawsuit was filed in Hillsborough County Circuit Court, claiming that the marina constituted a public nuisance, violated community standards, and was operating in violation of the development's CCRs. It was nonsense from a legal standpoint, but it still required a response. Marcus filed an immediate motion to dismiss, arguing that the HOA lacked standing to bring the suit and that all their claims were without merit. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, which meant 6 weeks of uncertainty for my slip holders. Some of them were getting nervous. Dave Sutton stopped by my house one evening, beer in hand. Jenny's worried we're going to lose the boat slip. She's been looking at other marinas, but everything's either full or wants double what you charge. You're not losing anything, Dave. This lawsuit is frivolous. My attorney says we'll win the motion to dismiss easily. But what if you don't? What if the judge sides with Patricia? Then we appeal and we keep fighting. But it won't come to that. I own the marina free and clear. No HOA has the authority to shut down a commercial business operating on private property outside their jurisdiction. He nodded, but I could see the worry in his eyes. That was what made me angriest about this whole situation. Patricia wasn't just attacking me, she was creating stress and uncertainty for dozens of families who just wanted to enjoy their boats in peace. The next day, I decided to go on the offensive. I contacted every slip holder and organized a meeting at the marina office. 20 people showed up, representing 18 of the 22 occupied slips. Here's the situation, I told them, standing on the dock with the afternoon sun glinting off the water. Patricia Moreland and the HOA are attempting to close this marina despite having no legal authority to do so. I'm fighting this in court and I'm confident we'll win. But I want you all to understand what's happening and what your rights are. A woman named Susan raised her hand. She wasn't a Ridgewater resident, but had been keeping her sailboat at my marina for 8 years. Can they fine us for keeping our boats here? They can try, but those fines would be unenforceable. You have valid lease agreements with me, and I have the legal right to operate this marina. Don't pay any fines the HOA tries to assess. What about the lawsuit? Another man asked. Does that put us at risk? No, the lawsuit is against me, not against any of you. Your lease agreements remain valid regardless of what happens in court. We talked for another hour, and I could see people relaxing as they understood the situation better. By the end of the meeting, several people volunteered to testify on my behalf if needed, describing how well-maintained the marina was and how important it was to the community. As everyone was leaving, Dave pulled me aside. You know what's really behind this, don't you? What do you mean? Patricia's house is on the other side of the development, nowhere near the marina. She can't even see it from her property. But her brother-in-law, Richard, owns that new luxury marina over in Clearwater, the one charging premium rates. I stared at him. How do you know that? Jenny's on the social committee. She hears things. Richard's been trying to buy up all the small marinas in the area, consolidate them into a chain. Word is, he offered to buy Sunset Marina from you a few years back. I remembered that now. A guy named Richard something had approached me about selling. I'd turned him down flat because I liked running the marina and didn't want to see it turned into some overpriced yacht club. I hadn't made the connection to Patricia. You think this is about pushing me to sell? I think it's worth looking into. I called Marcus immediately and told him what Dave had discovered. He promised to investigate, and within 3 days he had confirmation. Richard Moreland was Patricia's brother-in-law, and his company, Gulf Coast Marina Properties LLC, had been aggressively acquiring small marinas throughout the Tampa Bay area. Several marina owners had reported similar harassment tactics, bogus zoning complaints, manufactured neighborhood opposition, and pressure from local officials. This changes everything, Marcus said. If we can prove Patricia is using her HOA position to benefit her brother-in-law's business interests, that's abuse of authority and possibly fraud. We can file a countersuit. Do it? The countersuit was filed 2 weeks before the original hearing date. We sued Patricia Moreland individually and the HOA board for abuse of authority, interference with business relationships, and civil conspiracy. We also filed a formal complaint with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, which oversees HOA governance in the state. Patricia's response was immediate and predictable. She called an emergency HOA board meeting and tried to rally the residents against me, claiming I was attacking the association and trying to undermine community values. But this time, people pushed back. The meeting was packed with marina supporters who demanded to know why Patricia was using HOA resources to pursue a personal vendetta. Helen Fitzgerald, the treasurer, finally found her spine. Patricia, I've reviewed the legal bills associated with this marina lawsuit. We've spent over $40,000 in HOA funds. That's money that should be going toward community maintenance and improvements. And now we're facing a countersuit that could cost us hundreds of thousands more. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence. The motion was seconded immediately. Patricia tried to shut it down, but the residents in attendance wouldn't let her. When the vote was called, it was overwhelming. 37 in favor of removing Patricia as president, 8 opposed. Patricia stood there, her face purple with rage, as Todd Kemper weakly tried to gavel the meeting back to order. Finally, she grabbed her designer handbag and stormed out, shouting threats about lawsuits and consequences. Helen was appointed interim president, and her first act was to call an emergency board session. That meeting lasted less than 10 minutes. The board voted unanimously to withdraw the HOA's lawsuit against me and to issue a formal apology for the harassment and overreach. But I wasn't done with Patricia. The countersuit proceeded against her personally. Marcus had done his homework, uncovering emails between Patricia and her brother-in-law, discussing strategies to make the Sunset Marina situation unworkable for me. There were text messages detailing plans to file bogus complaints, rally residents against the marina, and force a sale within 6 months. The evidence was damning. Patricia's attorney tried to negotiate a settlement, but I refused. This wasn't just about money, it was about accountability. Patricia had abused her position, wasted community funds, and deliberately tried to destroy my business for personal gain. The trial was scheduled for October, but it never made it that far. In August, Patricia's attorney called Marcus and essentially begged for a settlement conference. We met in a sterile conference room at a Hillsborough County courthouse annex. Patricia looked diminished, her lawyer doing most of the talking. My client is prepared to offer a formal apology and financial compensation for your legal fees and damages. How much? Marcus asked. $75,000. That doesn't even cover our legal costs, much less the damage to Mr. Hartley's business reputation and the stress this has caused his tenants. We went back and forth for 2 hours. Finally, We settled on $250,000, paid by Patricia personally, along with a formal written apology to be published in the community newsletter and local newspaper. Patricia also agreed to resign from any HOA leadership position permanently and to have no involvement in community governance going forward. She signed the agreement with shaking hands, refusing to make eye contact with me. As we were leaving, I stopped her in the hallway. "Was it worth it, Patricia?" She looked at me with undisguised hatred. "You've destroyed my reputation and my finances over a petty property dispute." "No, I defended my rights against someone who thought their personal agenda was more important than the law. You did this to yourself." She turned and walked away without another word. I never saw her again. Word around the community was that she and her husband sold their house within a month and moved somewhere out of state. But that wasn't the end of the story. The investigation by the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation continued. They had uncovered evidence that Patricia's abuse of her HOA position wasn't limited to my situation. Over her 3 years as president, she had used HOA funds for personal expenses, awarded contracts to companies owned by relatives, and selectively enforced rules to benefit her friends while punishing those she disliked. In January, criminal charges were filed. Patricia was indicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of a fiduciary position. The amounts weren't huge by corporate fraud standards, maybe $60,000 total, but it was significant for a small community HOA. Her trial was scheduled for the following spring. I attended when I could, sitting in the gallery with several other Ridgewater residents who wanted to see justice served. The prosecution presented a devastating case, financial records showing HOA funds diverted to Patricia's personal accounts, emails proving she had awarded a landscaping contract to her nephew's company at inflated rates in exchange for kickbacks, testimony from residents who had been fined or threatened for violations that didn't actually exist. Patricia's defense was weak, basically arguing that she had been trying to improve the community and that any financial irregularities were accounting errors. The jury didn't buy it. After 4 days of trial and less than 3 hours of deliberation, they came back with guilty verdicts on 8 of the 9 counts. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and to the individuals she had defrauded, including me for the costs I had incurred defending against her baseless lawsuit. The restitution amount exceeded $600,000, effectively bankrupting her. As Patricia was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction that justice had been served, certainly, relief that the nightmare was over, but also a strange sadness that someone had destroyed their own life through arrogance and greed. Back at Ridgewater Estates, life slowly returned to normal. Helen Fitzgerald served as president for another year before passing the torch to a retired businessman named Gregory Marks, who ran the HOA with competence and transparency. The community's finances were audited and cleaned up, rules were enforced fairly and consistently. The annual meetings became routine rather than confrontational. Sunset Marina thrived. The publicity from the lawsuit and Patricia's criminal trial actually brought me new customers. All 22 slips stayed occupied with waiting lists. I used part of the settlement money to upgrade the docks, install better security lighting, and renovate the small office building. The marina became something of a community hub, with slip holders gathering for impromptu cookouts and fishing tournaments. Dave and Jenny Sutton became close friends. We spent countless evenings on their boat, cruising the Gulf Coast, fishing for grouper and snapper, watching the spectacular Florida sunsets paint the sky in oranges and purples. Jenny's worry about losing their slip had been replaced with contentment, and Dave never missed an opportunity to remind me that standing up to Patricia had been the right call. "You could have just paid her off early," he said one evening as we sat on his boat, lines in the water. "Avoided all the hassle and legal fees. And let her think she could bully anyone she wanted? No thanks. Some principles are worth fighting for." "Must be nice being rich enough to fight on principle," he joked. "I'm not rich, Dave. I just knew I was right." The legal battles had cost me close to $100,000 before the settlement, and countless hours of stress and frustration. But it had been worth it to establish clear boundaries and to hold someone accountable for abuse of power. The settlement check and eventual restitution payments had covered my costs and then some, but that had never been the point. I learned a lot from the experience. About the importance of documentation, about standing firm when you know you're right, about the dangers of unchecked authority and HOA governance. I also learned that most people, when given the facts, will support what's fair and just. The residents of Ridgewater Estates could have sided with Patricia's narrative about community standards and property values. Instead, they looked at the evidence and made the right call. One afternoon in May, almost exactly 3 years after receiving that first threatening letter, I was at the marina doing routine maintenance on the dock pilings when a car pulled up. A middle-aged couple got out, looking around with interest. "Can I help you?" I asked. "We're thinking of moving to the area," the woman said. "We heard this marina has good slips available." "I have a waiting list, but people move on the list pretty quickly. Are you boaters?" "We have a 32-foot sailboat," the man said. "We're looking for a place to keep it that's not ridiculously expensive." I showed them around, explaining the rates and the facilities. As we walked the docks, the woman asked about the community. "Is it a good neighborhood?" "We've had some bad experiences with HOAs in the past," I laughed. "We had some issues a few years back, but it's much better now. The current board is competent and actually follows the law." "What kind of issues?" So I told them the story, keeping it brief but hitting the highlights. Their eyes widened as I described Patricia's attempt to shut down the marina and the subsequent legal battles. "That's insane," the man said. "How did she think she could get away with that?" "Arrogance, mostly. She genuinely believed that being HOA president gave her unlimited authority. She found out otherwise." "What happened to her?" "Prison. She was embezzling HOA funds and abusing her position. Got 3 years. The woman nodded approvingly. "Good. Too many HOA board members think they're little dictators. It's nice to hear about one actually facing consequences." They ended up putting their names on the waiting list. 3 months later, when Slip 14 opened up, they moved their sailboat in and became regular fixtures at the marina. Tom and Linda were their names, and they fit perfectly into the community of boat enthusiasts who treated the marina like a second home. I thought about Patricia sometimes, wondering how she was adjusting to prison life, whether she had any moments of self-reflection or remorse, whether she understood that her downfall had been entirely self-inflicted. Probably not. People like Patricia rarely accept responsibility for their actions. It's always someone else's fault, always the result of persecution rather than consequences. Richard Moreland's marina empire had taken a hit too. Several of his properties were investigated after Patricia's fraud came to light, and while nothing criminal was proven against him directly, the negative publicity damaged his business. 2 of his marinas closed, and the others struggled to maintain occupancy. I heard through the grapevine that he had filed for bankruptcy protection. I didn't take any pleasure in that. Richard might have been morally questionable in his business practices, but he hadn't been the one to cross legal lines. Patricia had done that all on her own, driven by some toxic combination of family loyalty and personal ambition. The experience changed how I approached marina management too. I formalized everything, made sure every lease agreement was airtight, kept meticulous records of all maintenance and improvements. I joined the Florida Marine Industries Association and started networking with other marina owners, sharing best practices and warning signs of potential problems. Several of them had similar stories about HOA overreach or local government harassment. It was a more common problem than I had realized. I also got more involved in the Ridgewater Estates community, not in any official capacity but just as an active resident. I attended HOA meetings regularly, not to cause trouble, but to stay informed and to provide a voice for reasonable governance. I served on the Marina Liaison Committee, helping to ensure good communication between the HOA and the boat owners who used my facility. The community thrived under better leadership. Property values increased steadily. The common areas were well maintained without being obsessively micromanaged. People felt comfortable in their homes without fear of arbitrary fines or harassment. It was what an HOA was supposed to be, a tool for maintaining community standards and managing shared resources, not a weapon for enforcing personal preferences. 5 years after the initial letter, I stood on my dock early one morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. The marina was quiet, except for the gentle sound of water lapping against the pilings and the occasional cry of a seagull. Boats rocked peacefully in their slips, their lines creaking softly. It was a moment of perfect tranquility. My phone buzzed with a text from Dave. "Heading out around 9 if you want to join. Good weather for dolphin spotting." I texted back a confirmation and went to prepare my gear. As I gathered my fishing equipment and loaded a cooler with drinks and sandwiches, I reflected on how easily this could have all been taken away. If I had been less informed about my property rights, if I hadn't had the resources to fight back, if I had simply given in to Patricia's demands to avoid conflict, the marina might be closed now. Those 22 boats would be scattered to expensive commercial marinas or sitting in driveways on trailers, unused. Instead, the marina was busier and more successful than ever. I had expanded my services, offering boat maintenance and cleaning, helping slip holders with registration and insurance, organizing group outings and fishing tournaments. What had started as a simple investment property had become a passion project and a central part of my life. Dave arrived right on time, Jenny in tow, along with their teenage daughter, Madison. We loaded onto their boat and headed out into the Gulf, the powerful engines rumbling as we cleared the marina's no-wake zone. The water was calm, the sky cloudless, perfect conditions. We motored out about 6 miles and cut the engines, dropping lines for amberjack and king mackerel. Madison, who had been coming out on these trips since she was 10, handled her rod with practiced expertise. Within an hour, we had a respectable catch and had spotted a pod of dolphins playing in the distance. "This never gets old," Jenny said, leaning back in her seat with a contented smile. "Can you imagine if we'd lost access to the marina? We probably would have sold the boat. Too expensive and complicated to keep it anywhere else." "Wouldn't have happened," Dave said. "Connor's too stubborn to let Patricia win." "Wasn't about being stubborn," I replied. "It was about what was right. I owned that marina fair and square. No petty dictator with a president title was going to take it away." "Still," Jenny said, "a lot of people would have just given up or sold out when things got difficult. You stuck with it, and now we all benefit." It was true, though I hadn't thought of it in quite those terms at the time. I had been focused on the principle, on defending my property rights and standing up to bullying. But the ripple effects had been significant. 22 boat owners who kept their affordable slips, a community that learned to demand better from its leadership. An HOA that now functioned as it should, serving residents rather than controlling them. We fished until early afternoon, then headed back with our catch. At the marina, several other slip holders were around, maintaining their boats or just enjoying the weather. We fell into easy conversation, sharing stories and plans for upcoming trips. This was what Patricia had wanted to destroy, a vibrant community of people pursuing their passion for being on the water. That evening, I sat in my office at the marina, going through paperwork and planning maintenance schedules for the following month. The small building had become my refuge, a place where I could work in peace, with a view of the water and the gentle sounds of the marina around me. My consulting business was doing well, but I found myself spending more and more time on marina management. It was more fulfilling somehow, more tangible and immediate. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Helen Fitzgerald stood there, looking slightly awkward. "Hi, Connor. Do you have a minute?" "Of course. Come in." She settled into the chair across from my desk. "I wanted to thank you, actually, for how you handled everything with Patricia. I was on that board, and I should have stood up to her earlier. I let things go too far." "You eventually did the right thing," I said. "That's what matters. Still, I feel guilty. All those months of you dealing with her harassment, spending money on lawyers, dealing with the stress, and the rest of us just sat back because we didn't want to rock the boat. Helen, you're being too hard on yourself. Patricia was good at intimidating people and making them question their own judgment. That's how people like her operate. But when it mattered, when the facts were clear, you made the right call." She nodded, looking relieved. "The community is in much better shape now. We're actually functioning like an HOA should, taking care of common areas, managing the budget responsibly, enforcing reasonable rules fairly. It's night and day compared to Patricia's reign. That's because you have good people making decisions for the right reasons. It's not complicated, really. Just requires basic competence and integrity." We talked for a while longer about community matters and upcoming projects. Helen mentioned that the HOA was planning to build a new playground and asked if I'd be willing to donate some money toward it. I agreed immediately. Despite all the conflict, I loved Ridgewater Estates and wanted to see it thrive. After Helen left, I locked up the office and walked along the docks, checking that all the boats were properly secured for the night. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the water. A pelican sat on one of the pilings, watching me with calm indifference. Everything was as it should be. My phone rang. Marcus Chen, calling with an update I had been expecting. Patricia was released today, served 20 months with good behavior. Where'd she go? No idea. Probably far from Florida. She's finished here. The criminal record, the bankruptcy, the reputation. She'll never work in property management or HOA governance again. Good, I said simply. There was a pause. You're not worried she'll try something? Like what? She has no money, no authority, no standing in the community. What could she possibly do? And if she tries anything, we have all the documentation and legal precedents in place. No, I think Patricia learned her lesson. Maybe. Or maybe she just learned to be more careful next time. There won't be a next time, Marcus, not for her. We said goodbye and I pocketed my phone. Marcus was probably right to be cautious, but I genuinely wasn't worried. Patricia's power had come from her position and her ability to intimidate people. Both were gone now. She was just another person with a criminal record and a mountain of debt, trying to rebuild a shattered life. I felt no sympathy for her, but no malice either. She had made her choices and faced the consequences. That was how the system was supposed to work. Justice had been served, restitution had been paid, and everyone had moved on. As I walked back to my truck, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. From that first threatening letter to the legal battles to Patricia's criminal conviction, and finally to this peaceful evening at a thriving marina. It had been exhausting and expensive, and sometimes infuriating, but it had also been necessary and, ultimately, worthwhile. The marina was mine. Not because I had defeated Patricia in some personal vendetta, but because I owned it legally and operated it properly. That had been true from the beginning, and it remained true now. All the conflict, all the drama, all the legal maneuvering, it had all been in defense of a simple truth. This was my property, and I had the right to use it as I saw fit within the law. That was the real lesson of the whole experience. Not that HOAs were inherently bad, though they certainly could be when poorly run. Not that standing up to bullies always led to victory, though it had in this case. The real lesson was about knowing your rights, documenting everything, and refusing to be intimidated when you knew you were in the right. 6 months later, I was approached by a journalist from the Tampa Bay Times who was writing a feature story about HOA abuses and accountability. She had heard about the Sunset Marina case and wanted to interview me. I agreed, though I was careful to stick to the facts and avoid anything that sounded like gloating or score settling. The article ran in the Sunday edition, a lengthy piece that used my story as a centerpiece for examining broader issues of HOA governance in Florida. It quoted legal experts about the limits of HOA authority, featured interviews with several Ridgewater residents about life before and after Patricia's removal, and included details of Patricia's criminal conviction and the reforms that had been implemented afterward. The response was overwhelming. I received dozens of emails and phone calls from people across the state who had dealt with similar HOA overreach. Some wanted advice, others just wanted to share their own horror stories. I spent weeks responding to everyone, offering what guidance I could and connecting people with resources that might help them. Several attorneys reached out asking if I'd be willing to serve as an expert witness in other HOA cases. I declined most of them, not wanting to make a career out of HOA litigation, but I did agree to help in a few cases where the facts were egregiously similar to my own experience. One case in particular stood out. A woman in Fort Myers was being threatened with foreclosure because her HOA claimed she owed thousands in fines for violations she insisted she had never committed. After reviewing her documentation, I realized the HOA was using the exact same playbook Patricia had used: selective enforcement, bogus violations, and escalating fines designed to force compliance or financial ruin. I connected her with Marcus Chen, who took the case pro bono because he was so offended by the HOA's conduct. Within 6 months, the case was resolved. The woman's fines were dismissed, the HOA president was removed, and the board implemented reforms to prevent future abuses. It felt good to help someone avoid the nightmare I had endured. Life at Ridgewater Estates continued to improve. Property values increased steadily, driven by good governance and a reputation as a well-managed community. New families moved in, attracted by the waterfront location and the amenities, including access to my marina for those who wanted it. I expanded the marina's offerings, adding a small ship store that sold basic boating supplies, snacks, and drinks. It was a convenience for the slip holders and generated a bit of additional revenue. I hired a part-time dockmaster, a retired Navy veteran named Frank who knew boats inside and out and could handle basic maintenance and emergency repairs. The marina became something of a destination. Boaters from other communities would stop by for fuel and supplies, then end up staying for lunch at the picnic area I had set up near the office. Word spread about the friendly atmosphere and fair prices, and soon I was getting inquiries about expanding the facility. I looked into it seriously for a while, exploring options for purchasing adjacent waterfront property and adding more slips. But ultimately, I decided against it. 22 slips was manageable and personal. I knew every slip holder by name, knew their boats, knew their families. Expanding would turn it into a more commercial operation, and I liked the community feel of what I had built. Dave was appointed to the HOA board, replacing one of the members who had served alongside Patricia. He took his responsibilities seriously, always pushing for transparency and fairness in decision-making. We joked that he'd caught the civic duty bug, but I was proud of his commitment to making sure the community never fell back into the dysfunction of the Patricia era. 3 years after Patricia's release from prison, I heard through the grapevine that she had died. Heart attack, apparently, at the age of 61. Her obituary was brief, mentioning her previous work in property management and surviving family members, but carefully omitting any mention of her criminal conviction or the scandal at Ridgewater Estates. I felt a strange melancholy reading it. Patricia had been my adversary, had tried to destroy something I had built, had cost me significant time and money and stress. But she had also been a human being who had made terrible choices and paid a heavy price. Her last years had been marked by imprisonment, bankruptcy, disgrace. That was justice, perhaps, but it was also tragic. I never shared my thoughts about Patricia's death with anyone except Dave, who nodded thoughtfully when I mentioned it. She brought it on herself, he said. But yeah, it's still sad. She could have just been a decent HOA president, focused on taking care of the community, and none of this would have happened. That's the thing about power, I said. Even a little bit can corrupt people if they are not careful. And HOA president is more power than most people realize. Until they run into someone like you who knows their rights and won't back down, I raised my beer in a mock toast, to property rights and stubborn owners. Dave clinked his bottle against mine, and to marinas that stay open despite petty tyrants. We sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the sunset over the Gulf. The marina stretched out behind us, boats swaying gently in their slips, everything peaceful and orderly. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, one marina saved, one corrupt HOA president brought to justice. But it mattered. To me, to the 22 families who kept their boats there, to the community that had learned to demand better governance. 10 years after receiving that first threatening letter, the marina was busier than ever. The waiting list for slips was over a year long. I had upgraded the facilities multiple times, adding better lighting, improved security, modernized the electrical hookups. The ship store had expanded into a small cafe serving breakfast and lunch on weekends, run by a local family who made incredible Cuban sandwiches. Ridgewater Estates had become one of the most desirable communities on the Gulf Coast, known for its professional management and genuine sense of community. The HOA operated smoothly under a rotating series of competent board members who understood their role as stewards rather than rulers. Annual meetings were cordial affairs focused on budgets and maintenance schedules rather than power struggles and drama. I had become something of a local celebrity, though I downplayed it. Every few months, someone would approach me with an HOA horror story, asking for advice. I always gave the same counsel. Know your rights, document everything, get legal advice early, and don't be afraid to stand firm when you're in the right. Several times over the years, developers had approached me about selling the marina. The offers got progressively larger, eventually reaching well into 7 figures. I turned them all down. The marina was profitable enough on its own, and I loved running it. Money couldn't replace the satisfaction of providing a valuable service to the community and maintaining a space where people could pursue their passion for boating. Madison Sutton, Dave and Jenny's daughter, graduated from the University of South Florida with a degree in marine biology. She had spent her teenage years on boats at my marina, developing a love for the ocean that shaped her career path. She credited those experiences with inspiring her academic choices, and I was honored to write a recommendation letter for her graduate school applications. On a warm October evening, the marina held its 10th annual fishing tournament. It had started as a casual event with maybe 8 participants and had grown into something of a local tradition, drawing competitors from across the Tampa Bay area. We had categories for different species, prizes for biggest catch and most fish, and a big cookout afterward where everyone shared their stories and celebrated. I stood at the weigh-in station, recording catches and laughing at the tall tales being spun about the ones that got away. Dave was there with Madison, who was home visiting from her graduate program. Frank, the dock master, was manning the grill, filling the air with the delicious smell of fresh fish and burgers. Helen Fitzgerald came by with her husband, both of them having taken up boating in recent years. They kept a small center console in Slip 8 and spent most weekends exploring the coast. "This is wonderful," Helen said, looking around at the crowd. "Can you believe we almost lost all of this?" "I try not to think about it," I admitted. "But yeah, it came pretty close." "Thank God you stood your ground. This marina means so much to so many people." As the evening wore on and the tournament winners were announced, I found myself reflecting on the journey. From that first threatening letter to the legal battles to Patricia's criminal conviction to this moment, surrounded by friends and community members celebrating their shared love of the water. It had been a long road with plenty of difficult moments, but I wouldn't change any of it. The marina had become more than just a business or an investment. It was a gathering place, a community hub, a place where people came together around a common interest. The boats in those 22 slips represented dreams and adventures, family time and personal passion. Protecting the marina had meant protecting all of that, and I was proud of what we had built together. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the marina was quiet again, I walked the docks one last time. The boats creaked gently in their slips, the water lapped softly against the pilings, a cool breeze came off the Gulf. Everything was exactly as it should be. My phone buzzed with a text from Dave. "Great tournament. Thanks for everything you do, man." I typed back, "Thanks for having my back all those years ago." "Always," came the immediate reply. I smiled and pocketed my phone. That was what community was supposed to be about. People supporting each other, standing up for what's right, working together toward common goals. Not petty tyrants enforcing arbitrary rules, not power-hungry board members abusing their authority, not bullies trying to intimidate those they saw as obstacles. The marina was mine. The slips were mine. The right to operate my business was mine. Those truths had been tested and proven in court, validated by judges and juries, confirmed by every level of the legal system. Patricia Moreland had learned that lesson the hard way, at the cost of her freedom and her future. But more importantly, the marina belonged to all of us in a different sense. To Dave and Jenny and their family memories on the water, to Susan and her cherished sailboat, to Frank and his retirement passion, to every slip holder who kept their boat here and found community and friendship along with a place to dock. That was what I had really been fighting for, though I hadn't fully articulated it at the time. Not just my property rights, important as those were, but the preservation of something valuable and meaningful that brought people together and improved their lives. As I locked the gate and headed to my truck, I thought about how easily it could have all gone differently. If I had been less informed, less determined, less financially able to fight back. If Marcus hadn't been such a skilled attorney, if the residents hadn't eventually rallied to support what was right, if the legal system hadn't worked as it should, but it had all worked out. Justice had prevailed. The good guys, for once, had won. And now, a decade later, the marina thrived as proof that standing up to bullies and defending your rights was worth the cost. I drove home through the quiet streets of Ridgewater Estates, past well-maintained homes with neat lawns and tasteful landscaping. The community looked peaceful and prosperous, a far cry from the contentious atmosphere of the Patricia era. Good governance made all the difference, and the residents had learned to demand it. At home, I poured a bourbon and sat on my back porch, looking out over the water. The marina was visible in the distance, its security lights creating a warm glow against the dark sky. Somewhere out there, 22 boats sat safe in their slips, waiting for their next adventure on the Gulf. It was a good feeling, knowing I had built something lasting and valuable, not just for myself, but for everyone who benefited from it. That was the real victory, more meaningful than any legal judgment or settlement check. The HOA story had become legendary in our community and beyond, a cautionary tale about the limits of HOA authority and the importance of standing up to abuses of power. I still got asked about it regularly, still heard from people dealing with similar situations who wanted advice or just validation that they weren't crazy to fight back. My answer was always the same. Know your rights, stand your ground, and don't let anyone bully you out of what's legally yours. It wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always cheap, but it was always worth it when the principle mattered. The Sunset Marina would be there for years to come, serving boaters and building community, a testament to one man's refusal to be pushed around by a petty tyrant with a title and an agenda. And every time I walked those docks or helped a slipholder with a problem or watched families head out for a day on the water, I knew that standing up to Patricia Moreland had been one of the best decisions I ever made. The marina was mine. Every slip in it was mine. And no HOA, no matter how aggressive or delusional, was ever going to change that fundamental truth.